Today we're going to take a tour of spring ephemerals in a woodland habitat in eastern North America. I've brought you to the Palos Forest Preserve area located in northeastern Illinois near Chicago. We're going to take a closer look at some of the common plants you might encounter here. We'll learn how to identify them based on their physical traits, and we'll discuss the plant families they belong to. So come along on this tour and deepen your appreciation for spring wildflowers. First, let's take a closer look at a plant that's causing some concern for our native species, Alliaria petiolata, also known as garlic mustard. This plant is not native to North America. It was brought over from Europe as a culinary herb. So it is edible and nutritious, but it is also highly invasive and can outcompete our native plants for resources. In fact, it has become such a problem that some organizations have started holding garlic mustard polls to remove it from our natural areas. In many places, it can grow into dense patches where native plants get crowded out. Garlic mustard is a member of the Brassicaceae plant family, which is characterized by having 4-petaled flowers. Many vegetables with a reputation for high nutrition are a part of this family, including broccoli, cabbage, collard greens, and Brussels sprouts. Quick identifying traits of garlic mustard are its cross-shaped white flowers in dense clusters and alternate heart-shaped or triangular toothy leaves. Later in the video, we'll discuss why this plant is a problem for our ecosystem and share some ideas on what you can do to help mitigate the spread of this aggressive invader. Now let's take a look at some of our native plants. First up, we have Claytonia virginica, or the spring beauty. This small plant is very abundant in the woods here at Palos. Its pink and white striped flowers are the most notable trait for identification. It has 5 of these striped flower petals, 2 green sepals, 5 stamens with pink anthers, and a pistil with a tripartite style. They have opposite, linear leaves, which can sometimes be as wide as the plant is tall. This plant is a member of the Montiaceae family. The order is Caryophyllales. The pink coloration comes from betalain pigments, which are unique to plants of this order. Next, we have a member of the buttercup family, Ranunculaceae. This is Thalictrum thalictroides, or rue anemone. No, not that anemone. Anemone comes from the Greek word enemis, which means wind. I suppose this plant earned its common name by fluttering in the wind a lot, similar to how a sea anemone flutters in the waves, which are sort of like the wind underwater. Personally, I would have chose a name easier to say than anemone. I have trouble pronouncing it. It's anemone, not anemone. The scientific name Thalictrum thalictroides is no fun to pronounce either. Anyway, this delicate plant has white flowers. Each flower will have between 5 and 10 petal-like sepals. It has a central cluster of pistils and an outer ring of numerous yellow stamens. The stamens have white filaments and yellow anthers. The flowers are surrounded by whorls of leaflets. These small leaflets are round and their ends are 3-lobed. There's a very similar and closely related plant in the anemone genus commonly known as false rue anemone, which also occurs in this area. I did not see any, but the false rue anemone can be distinguished by always having 5 petal-like sepals, whereas the rue anemone will have between 5 and 10. One of the more showy spring ephemerals is Trillium recurvatum, known as prairie Trillium. Trillium recurvatum is a slow-growing perennial plant that can take as many as 10 years before flowering. The Trillium genus as a whole is characterized by showy three-petaled flowers and a distinctive three-leafed arrangement. Trilliums are a member of the monocots. Monocots comprise about 1/4 of all flowering plants and most of our major grains, including rice, wheat, and corn. Monocots can usually be identified by having their flower parts occur in multiples of 3 and for having parallel leaf venation. Prairie Trillium grows in both prairies and woodlands and produces a single flower that has 3 maroon petals and 6 stamens with long black anthers. The 3 leaves are typically mottled with dark green and white and are arranged in a whorl beneath the flower. White-tailed deer are especially known to eat the flowers and foliage of prairie Trillium. It's possible that the mottled pattern of the leaves is an adaptation to deer predation. This pattern may help to camouflage the plant with the surrounding forest floor. Next up, we have Phlox divaricata, also known as blue phlox. Phlox divaricata typically grows to a height of 12 to 18 inches and produces clusters of fragrant tubular blue flowers with 5 petals. The leaves are lance-shaped and arranged oppositely along the stem. The stamens and pistil are located inside the center opening of the corolla and can't be seen without dissecting the flower. This plant is often found in woodlands, meadows, and along stream banks. It's a popular plant for home gardens and is often used for borders or as ground cover. Another common spring ephemeral is Cardamine concatenata, or cutleaf toothwort. This plant has a floppy spike of flowers at the end of its stalk, which will open up more on warmer days. Let's take a closer look, like this guy's doing right here. Each flower has 4 white petals, 4 green or purple sepals, several stamens with conspicuous yellow anthers, and a single pistil. We prefer looking at flowers to identify plants, but this plant's leaves are perhaps its most distinguishing characteristic. They occur in whorls of 3, have long petioles, and are deeply and palmately dissected into 3 to 5 segments with large teeth on the margins. Cardamine concatenata is an important food source for early spring butterflies and bees and can be found in the wooded areas of the Palos Forest Preserve. Like garlic mustard, this plant belongs to the Brassica family. Another member of the Brassicaceae family is Barbarea vulgaris, known as wintercress or yellow rocket. Like garlic mustard, this plant is non-native to North America, but unlike garlic mustard, it is generally considered naturalized rather than invasive. In other words, it reproduces and disperses on its own, but its impact on the environment is not severe and can even have positive effects. The upper stems on this plant terminate in racemes of yellow, cross-shaped flowers consisting of 4 petals, 6 stamens with yellow to light brown anthers, and a single pistil with a thick style. Its upper leaves are alternately arranged and are toothed or shallowly lobed. This plant is native to Eurasia and North Africa. I'd be remiss if I did a video on vernal wildflowers and did not mention the violets. The genus name is Viola, and there are several different species in the area. The taxonomy for Viola can be a challenge. Disclaimer here, I have no training in botany or taxonomy. I'm using a combination of iNaturalist and other websites to identify plants, along with this 1,300-page book that details over 3,000 plant species in the Chicago region. There are differing opinions out there about what constitutes a separate species versus what are variable traits within the same species. There can also be hybridization between species. There can also be variability in traits between early spring and summer. With all this in mind, I'm not going to try to identify the violas by species. The shape of the flowers are their most distinctive characteristic. They have bilateral symmetry, featuring 2 upper petals, 2 lateral petals, and a lower petal that will often have a nectar spur. While violet is the most common color we see among species, the yellow-colored violas are also quite common, and there are white ones too. Stems and leaves can vary from being glabrous or hairy. Leaves can be lobed or not lobed. Some leaves can be heart-shaped. Some taper towards their tips. As a whole, this genus can be identified based on the shape of its distinctive flowers and the fact that it never reaches more than about 4 inches in height off the ground. Another spring wildflower to look for is Ranunculus septentrionalis, which is the common buttercup for this area. Some authors regard this plant as a subspecies of Ranunculus hispidus. Like the violas, taxonomists have the dilemma of figuring out what constitutes a separate species versus what are variable traits within the same species. Whatever the name, this is our common, waxy yellow, large-flowered buttercup. The first thing that strikes you about this plant is how shiny and waxy the flower petals appear. There are 5 yellow petals and 5 sepals beneath the petals. Same as Thalictrum thalictroides, the earlier plant we looked at from the buttercup family, there is a central cluster of greenish pistils and an outer ring of numerous yellow stamens. The upper surface of the leaflets have scattered oppressed hairs. The lower surface has spreading hairs along the major veins. Among vernal wildflowers, these plants bloom for longer than average. The genus name Ranunculus is the namesake for the Ranunculaceae plant family known as the buttercups. This large family has a worldwide distribution and includes 43 genera, including the 2 we've studied in this video. Wrapping up our tour of spring ephemerals is a plant you might find in the forest understory. We have Erythronium albidum, or the white trout lily. Its mottled leaves resemble the skin of a trout, apparently, hence the common name. Not sure I see a resemblance to any fish that I know of. This might be a good example of why it's best to use scientific names. Anyway, this plant's downward-facing flowers are quite showy. Lilies are monocots, just like trilliums, and so its flower parts occur in multiples of 3. This plant has 6 recurved white tepals, 6 stamens with long yellow anthers, and a slender style with a stigma that has 3 lobes spreading outward. The leaves are dark green and covered with a mottled pattern of purple blotches and have smooth margins. This plant is an important source of food for deer like the prairie trillium we studied earlier, so again, perhaps the mottling pattern is an adaptation to avoid being seen by them. So there you have it, a closer look at some of the common early spring ephemerals you'll find in the Palos Forest Preserve area near Chicago. Remember, it's valuable to learn how to identify these plants and to be aware of the threats posed by invasive species like garlic mustard. There's a difference between non-native and invasive. Most non-native plants do not become invasive. However, the ones that do can reduce the habitat for native species. Here is garlic mustard growing next to Cardamine concatenata. We can see that the Alliaria has grown taller than the Cardamine and is already shading some of its sunlight. Here is the Barbarea species we studied earlier, and again here is the Alliaria looming over it. Garlic mustard did not evolve in our ecosystem, and so there are no checks and balances in place to stop it from taking over. If you do come across garlic mustard, consider pulling it to help keep it in check. And if you're foraging for wild edibles, its leaves are nutritious and arguably tasty. It has a texture like spinach, and as the name implies, there is a garlicky flavor to it. You can try adding it to a salad or pesto for a unique twist, or you can cook it up as you would spinach. The flavor is certainly not for everyone. There's a reason we don't see garlic mustard in the herb section of grocery stores. However, it's fun to know that this plant has been used as a flavoring in foods for thousands of years. Phytoliths and pottery found in Europe dating all the way back to about 4,000 years ago indicate its use in that era. In 17th century Britain, garlic mustard was recommended as a flavoring. Jokes aside about the culinary prowess of British people, we can taste this plant and maybe gain a small sense of what eating was like for past humans. Let me end this video by encouraging you to get outside and explore the world of plants. We don't need to use up vacation time at our jobs or travel to faraway places to discover things that'll make us enjoy our natural world. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.